All right, so it looks like you guys have sent in a ton of articles about daylight saving time,
Yeah.
and it seems like you're really trying to figure out, is this whole clock changing thing going to
Well,
stick around?
it's a good question.
Yeah, is it, and we've got some interesting stuff here. We've got excerpts from a Forbes article called Daylight Saving Time Starts This Weekend, but Trump calls ending it a 50-50 issue.
Oh, wow.
And then we even have an Elon Musk poll thrown in for good measure.
Interesting.
Yeah, so this is going to be a real deep dive here.
It is. It really is. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. The seemingly simple question, like, are we going to keep doing this or not?
Right.
Just opens up like this rabbit hole of politics and health concerns.
Yeah.
And then even just like what time even is, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Well, it's true. Like, what is time anyway?
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah. So let's jump right in. I guess this Forbes article, kind of dives right into former President Trump's stance on DST.
And remember back when he was like all over Truth Social,
Yeah,
calling it inconvenient and costly,
I do.
and saying that he wanted to ditch it entirely.
Yeah, he seemed pretty adamant about it.
He did. He seemed very, pretty fired up about getting rid of daylight saving time.
Yeah.
And then, in this more recent interview, he seems to have really softened his stance, calling it a 50-50 issue.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
It's like why that shift?
Yeah. Right.
What happened there?
Yeah, like, is it a calculated political move, or is it, or did he realize that even a president can't just like snap his fingers and change time?
That's a good point, because it does require an act of Congress and presidential approval
Right.
to actually change daylight saving time.
Right. It's not a unilateral decision.
Exactly.
So, maybe he's just being realistic about the challenges involved, or maybe he's just, kind of gauging public opinion and doesn't want to champion a cause that might not actually have widespread support.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that actually leads us to another really interesting piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
Elon Musk's X poll.
Oh, yeah.
So he asked his followers what they would prefer if DST was eliminated.
Yeah.
Would they want it an hour earlier or an hour later?
Interesting.
And I have to admit, I thought people would overwhelmingly choose that, extra hour of daylight in the evening.
Right. More daylight. Right.
Yeah. But the results were surprisingly close.
How close are we talking?
Well, 58.1% voted for an hour later,
Okay.
and 41.9% preferred an hour earlier.
Huh.
So not a huge difference.
Not a huge difference.
Yeah.
And, it's not a scientific poll or anything like that.
Of course not.
But it does suggest that public opinion on this issue might be more divided than we initially thought.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because you just assume that everybody wants more daylight in the evening.
Right.
But clearly there's a significant portion of the population that maybe doesn't feel that way.
Right, exactly. And it makes you wonder, like, why?
Yeah.
Like, what are the reasons why somebody would prefer one versus the other?
Right. Is it just like personal preference, or is there something deeper going on there,
Yeah, like, are there deeper factors at play, like maybe work schedules,
Yeah.
family life,
Uh-huh.
maybe even where you live geographically makes a difference?
That's a great point. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
So, before we get too lost in speculation here,
Sure.
maybe we should step back for a second and give our listener a little bit of historical context.
Right.
They sent in all these articles, so they probably already know the basics.
Of
Or
course.
a little refresher never hurts, right?
Little refresher never hurts,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah. So to understand this whole debate,
Yeah.
it's actually really helpful to look at, how we even got here.
Right.
Daylight saving time as we know it was first implemented during World War I
Oh, wow.
in 1918.
Okay.
And it was a wartime measure primarily aimed at conserving energy and maximizing daylight hours.
So they were really just trying to squeeze every last drop of sunlight out of the day.
It seems like it, yeah,
Yeah.
to support the war effort.
To support the war effort.
Yeah, pretty clever, actually.
It is pretty clever.
If you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a unique solution for a very unique time.
Right.
But here's where the history gets even more interesting.
Okay.
So after the war, DST was repealed,
Okay.
but then reinstated in 1966
Wow.
with the Uniform Time Act.
So this whole time-changing thing has been on like a roller coaster ride.
It has. It has.
Yeah.
It's been back and forth.
It makes you wonder if it was ever really meant to be like a permanent fixture in our lives.
Right. Was this always supposed to be a thing?
Yeah.
Or was it just kind of a temporary measure that just sort of stuck around?
Exactly. And I think that's really why this debate continues to rage on.
Yeah.
Are we clinging to a policy that's outdated and no longer serves its original purpose? Or is there still a valid reason to, keep shifting our clocks twice a year?
Yeah. Is there a reason we're still doing this?
Right.
Good question.
Yeah, so to get to the bottom of that, we need to really dive into the pros and cons, right?
Absolutely.
Like, what are the actual arguments for and against daylight saving time?
Right. Let's examine the evidence and see if we can unravel this whole time twisting enigma.
Okay, let's do it.
All right. So let's get into it. Well, let's start with some of the concerns.
Okay.
One of the most prominent voices against DST is the American Medical Association, or the AMA.
Right.
And they've raised some pretty serious red flags about the potential health impacts of daylight saving time.
Yeah, I was reading about that. They're talking about increased risk of heart attacks and strokes and even mood disorders.
It's true.
Like, it's not just a minor inconvenience. It seems like it could actually be, like, messing with our bodies.
It's not just like, oh, I'm a little sleepy. It's more than that.
Right.
The AMA has pointed to studies that show that this abrupt time change can really disrupt our circadian rhythms. Our natural sleep-wake cycles.
Right.
And when those get thrown off, it can trigger a whole cascade of negative effects.
So we're not just talking about feeling a little groggy for a few days. This is about, like, potentially serious health risks.
Exactly.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like, why are we still doing this if it's causing so much harm?
Well, there are those who argue that the benefits outweigh the risks.
Okay.
One of the most common arguments in favor of DST is that it provides more daylight hours for outdoor activities.
Right.
So boosting recreation and tourism and even retail sales.
Yeah, I get that, there's something about those long summer evenings that just feels good. Like more time for barbecues.
Exactly.
Evening walks, kids playing outside. It does seem to, enhance our quality of life in some ways.
And people are out and about more. They're spending money.
Yeah.
So there's an economic argument there as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about all the different factors that are kind of tied into this.
Yeah, it is.
So what about the energy savings argument?
Well, yeah, the energy savings.
Because I always hear that daylight saving time helps us conserve energy.
Right. So proponents also argue that DST can lead to energy savings as people are less likely to use artificial lighting when there's more daylight.
Makes sense.
However, the research on this is a little bit mixed.
Oh, really?
And some studies actually suggest that the savings might be minimal or even non-existent.
So it's not like a slam dunk case then?
Not necessarily.
No. Interesting.
And it could be that people are just shifting their energy use rather than actually reducing it.
So like maybe they're using less electricity at home but more in other areas.
Exactly, like maybe they're running their air conditioners longer.
Right.
Because of the extended daylight hours.
Makes sense.
So it's a complex equation.
Yeah. It seems like every time we peel back a layer of this DST onion, we find more layers underneath.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating topic.
It is. But before we get too overwhelmed here,
sure,
let's talk about that bombshell piece of legislation, the Sunshine Protection Act of 2022.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't that almost make DST permanent?
It did. It really did.
Like it sailed through the Senate, but then ultimately stalled in the House.
Yeah. It's a perfect example of how this debate is playing out on the political stage.
Yeah. Can you imagine if it had actually passed?
I know.
We'd be living in a world of, like, permanent DST right now.
It would be a very different world.
It would be. Yeah. No more clock changes.
No more clock changes.
No more biannual time warp.
That's right.
Some people would be ecstatic, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
But others would probably be, like, dreading those dark winter mornings.
Yeah. I mean, you got to think about the people who live in northern latitudes.
Right.
They already have very short days in the winter. And permanent DST could mean that sunrise wouldn't happen until, like, well into the morning hours.
Oh, wow. I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah.
So it's like this whole DST thing has this ripple effect, Yeah. It impacts everything from our sleep schedules to our energy consumption to even the political landscape.
It really is a microcosm of how interconnected everything is.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And it highlights the importance of understanding, like, the full scope of an issue.
Right.
Before we make decisions that could have widespread consequences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well said. So after diving into the history and the pros and cons and the political drama surrounding DST,
Yeah.
where does that leave our listener, the one who sent us down this rabbit hole?
Right.
What's the takeaway for them?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that this isn't a simple issue with a clear-cut answer.
Right.
There are valid arguments on both sides, and ultimately comes down to weighing the potential benefits against the risks.
Right.
And deciding what's most important for you.
It's like a giant societal cost-benefit analysis.
Yeah.
Except the stakes are our health and our well-being, and even like our relationship with time itself.
Exactly.
No pressure.
No pressure.
So it's a decision that each individual has to make for themselves.
Right.
Do they prioritize that extra hour of daylight, even if it means potential health risks?
Exactly.
Do they value the consistency of standard time?
Yeah.
Even if it means like sacrificing some recreational opportunities?
It's a tough call.
It's a tough call, and there's no right or wrong answer.
That's right.
But at least now our listener has, all the information they need to make an informed decision.
They've got the knowledge.
Knowledge is power, right?
Knowledge is power.
Yeah, it's like we've given them this, a key to unlock this whole daylight saving time puzzle.
I like that analogy.
They've got the history, the arguments, the political landscape.
Yeah.
Now it's up to them to decide, how they want to fit those pieces together.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole deep dive. It's not just about presenting facts and figures.
Right.
It's about empowering our listener to think critically and form their own conclusions.
It's funny. I used to think of daylight saving time as this like simple, almost trivial thing.
Yeah.
Just an extra hour of daylight. No big deal.
Right.
But after all this, research and discussion, I realized it's so much more than that. It's like a window into how we as a society grapple with time and prioritize our values and, make decisions that impact our lives in these really profound ways.
That's a really good point. It really speaks to the broader quotient of how we structure our lives around time.
Right.
Are we serving the clock, or is the clock serving us?
Oh, that's a great question.
It is a big question.
Yeah, it's like we're in this constant tug of war between our natural rhythms and the demands of, the modern world.
And daylight saving time is such a prime example of that struggle. We're trying to manipulate time to fit our needs. But in doing so, we might be creating all these unintended consequences for our health, our well-being, even our connection to the natural world.
It's almost like a cautionary tale about the limits of human control.
I like that.
Like we can change the numbers on the clock, but can we really change the nature of time itself?
I don't know that we can.
Probably not.
But what we can do is engage in thoughtful conversations. Weigh the evidence carefully. And make informed decisions about how we want to live our lives in relation to time.
So after all this, where do you stand on daylight saving time?
Oh, gosh, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Is it necessary inconvenience, or is it a relic of the past, or is it something we should just, accept as part of modern life?
I honestly don't think there's an easy answer.
Yeah.
It really depends on your individual values, your lifestyle, even where you live. But hopefully this deep dive has given you the information and the different perspectives you need to form your own opinion.
Absolutely. We've explored Trump's, flip-flopping stance, Elon Musk's curious poll.
That was a weird one.
It was the surprising history of DST and, of course, the heated debate over its pros and cons.
Right.
I mean, it's been quite a journey.
It has been. It's been fascinating.
It has. And I think the most important thing is that the journey doesn't end here.
I agree.
This conversation about time, about our health, about how we structure our lives.
Yeah.
It's an ongoing process.
It is. It's constantly evolving.
Absolutely. So to our listener, we leave you with this. Keep questioning, keep exploring, keep diving deep into the topics that matter to you.
Yes.
Because ultimately, the most valuable knowledge is the knowledge we discover for ourselves.
Well said. And remember, the clock is ticking.
Until next time, deep divers.